Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your host, Tammy Ferreira.
Hey guys, Tammy here. And this week I'm going to talk about why you can't afford to screw it up. This sort of falls under one of those things like what I wish I knew in the beginning, right? And I think the further people get in this process, the more and more they wish they had known things sooner. And so I'm going to try to give you that benefit of whatever stage you're at, knowing things as quickly as you possibly can so that you don't screw it up. Now, if you're listening to the podcast or you're watching me on YouTube, please don't forget to hit like and also subscribe so you get notified as new episodes are released. One of the things that people struggle with, and whether they're self-represented or they have an attorney, is sometimes they end up wearing the black hat in court. This is a term that Thomas and I heard a local attorney use one time here, and when we were talking to him, and it just sort of stuck with Thomas, and this became how he described when you're standing in front of the judge and you're the person that the judge isn't happy with, I guess is a good way to put it, right? That the judge is either angry with or doesn't like their conduct or doesn't like something that they did. And so you're kind of the villain. That's what this wearing the black hat thing means. And then you're the villain in the story and the other person is wearing the white hat. So they're the good person in the story. And so Thomas always used to say, how do we switch you back to where you're the one wearing the white hat? And there are a lot of different things that go into this part of it. And I talk about it a lot in various videos. But just to give you kind of a big picture overview, your conduct out of court is just as important as your conduct in court. And we talk a lot about behaviors in court, not speaking when other people are speaking, being respectful, dressing the court as your honor, worrying about your physical dress, your physical appearance in front of the court, and kind of understanding the procedures and the flow of things so that you don't anger your judge. But the second piece of that is the way you're conducting yourself out of court. And I think that's the main part that ends up getting you wearing the black hat. That is when you're communicating with your ex in ways the court doesn't like, when you're handling those crisis situations in ways that the court doesn't think is optimal, that could get you wearing the black hat. So this all goes back to education to me and understanding what it is the court even wants you to do. Because how can you keep from wearing the black hat, or better yet, get yourself wearing the white hat if you don't even know what the things are that you are or aren't supposed to be doing? And so the earlier that you can educate yourself on these things, the better off that you're going to be. Now, once you do get a negative result from the court, you definitely have a much higher mountain to climb to try to turn that around. And a lot of times when people get a negative result, that's when they'll come in and they'll say, hey, I want some help fixing this. And this is why I titled this, You Can't Afford to Screw It Up. Because once you've put yourself in that position of, okay, I have screwed it up and now I need help. Now we're trying to get you out of the negative situation and just sort of bring you back to baseline. Whereas before you started at baseline and our goal would have been to get you even better than that. But now we're starting in this negative place because the case has kind of been messed up, in the first instance. And this is why that it's easier to get the help in the beginning, get some support, and really figure out how all of this works and comes together so that you don't make those mistakes in the very beginning. It also costs you more when you have to try to correct the errors and the mistakes. Again, because then that's the point at which we do sometimes seek out legal counsel or some sort of help. And so then you're really having to pour your money and your effort and your energy into trying to undo this negative result. Whereas if you had spent a little bit of money up front trying to get some help and understanding what to do, you might not have gotten yourself into this position in the first instance. And once we are in this position, it seems like the battle goes on and on and on. Because if we don't get the outcome that we want, what do? We tend to go back and fight about it again. And then we don't like, the things that the court says, or we feel we want to be heard, or we didn't get to tell the judge everything. And if we had just told the judge everything, they would have had a different opinion. And all of these things start ruminating in our head. And so we get into this fight mode where we just want to continue to try to fight to get the result that we were trying to get. A lot of times for people, this looks like an appeal. I get a lot of people that will call and ask about appeals. I see a lot of motion for reconsideration and different things that kind of say to the judge, hey, judge, I think you got it wrong. It's not usually, in my experience, that the judge got it wrong. It's that you're not understanding the way the court is analyzing your situation, be it custody or divorce or your finances or whatever it is. You're not understanding the way the court is approaching these problems. And so you believe the judge is wrong, but from the judge's perspective and the way they're analyzing this under the law, they made exactly the right decision. And so an appeal or a motion for reconsideration is really a form of saying to the judge, look, I think you got this wrong. And it's amazing to me that we take that approach and then we expect the court to go, oh yeah, I screwed that up. Let me change my mind. You just don't see that happen. I can count on one hand the number of times that has actually happened. And so these consequences of all of these actions really start to flow down to your children, because once you're wearing the black hat and things start going against you, if you're in a child custody situation, a lot of times it will result in less time. And even sometimes when you're the more stable parent, I have seen that parent's behavior and that parent's actions cause them to actually get less time with the children. If that's not the problem, and it's not that you get less time and you still end up with a 50-50, well, then you're really at odds with your ex, and that conflict has really increased, and you're both sort of in battle mode. That flows down to your children. And so it's sort of like this ripple effect of where it starts having a domino effect on everything else in your life. So the kids are stressed. They're not doing well. You're stressed because you didn't do well in court. You're spending a boatload in legal fees at this point, trying to undo the problems that were done. And plus you've got this ex that you're still trying to deal with in the court stuff and in your day-to-day life, and make sure that you're crossing all your T's and dotting all your I's where the court is concerned. So again, if we had not screwed it up in the first instance, it would have saved us all of this grief. And I think one of the things that really comes into play is unrealistic expectations. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to that are a year in, a year and a half in, that said, you know what? I just thought this was going to be done in 3 to 6 months. I thought I was going to end up with, this significant support award, 50-50 custody, and 50-50 on our assets. But they didn't take the time to educate themselves on the process, on how it works, and on how long that can take. I have seen people who went out and, maybe had a spouse that was a very high earner and knew that they were going to get a significant amount of assets as well, but didn't have access to those funds right away, went out, lived on credit cards, expecting that in 6 months or so they would have their money and everything would be fine, only to find out 6 months later that you're still sitting in the same boat and nothing has really progressed forward very much. And so, again, understanding the legal process and how this all works and plays out is really important. Most of the time, the first decision that the court makes is on custody, because everything else flows out from there. Now, if you don't have children, obviously, that's not going to be an issue in your case. But if you're watching me, I'm assuming the vast majority of you probably have children at home. And so you're going to have that custody piece done first. Then they usually move to support. Then they usually move to the division of the assets and debts. And the division of the assets and debts doesn't happen until you get to the very end of your case. And the very end of your case comes in one of two ways. Either you go to trial or you reach settlement. And if you go to trial, then the court has to set that trial date. And in California, depending on the length of time that is, that can be several months out. Thomas had a case at the beginning of the year that we think is going to be about a 3 or 4 day trial, and they set us a year out. If you have a half-day trial, okay, maybe you're only looking at 2 or 3 months, but it varies state to state. And so you may be working on these various assumptions around the timelines or the money or the parenting schedule or whatever it is that are false assumptions that aren't even accurate. And so if you had known in the very beginning that those weren't accurate, then you could have taken steps to sort of mitigate some of this damage. But again, once you screw it up, then you're trying to backtrack, right? And you're trying to recover, which is much, much harder. The other problem that I see that happens with this is you have help. You have the least amount of help at the time when you need it the most. What do I mean by that? A lot of people go out in the very beginning and they retain an attorney. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go out and retain an attorney, but I'm saying that you do have to think about overall in the process how much money you have to spend on this. And people are always floored when we talk about attorney's fees. It's anybody that's new to the process, they are usually absolutely floored. So what happens initially is you go in and you pay this initial retainer, right? It's usually around $5,000, maybe $7,000, $8,000 if you have a complex case, somewhere in that ballpark, $5,000 to $10,000 for most attorneys. But depending on how the other side reacts, and if people are filing motions in court, we don't agree on custody, we've got to file a motion on that. We're not agreeing on support. We've got to file a motion on that because all of these temporary issues are going to be dealt with until I get down to the final step, which is the division of assets and debts. And then we're either going to settle or we're going to have to go to trial. And there's usually some financial disclosure that happens in there. Almost every state, I believe every state requires some form of financial disclosure between parties. So you have these certain steps that have to be done. And so you need to understand what your overall budget is and what you're overall likely to spend. So a good thing to ask an attorney is, what do you typically see a case like this cost in total if you handle it all the way from start to finish? And we tend to just ask about the retainer and the billing rate and sort of the immediate things that are in front of us because we don't have realistic expectations, right? We don't understand the process. We don't know what's coming. And so it's not dawning on us that this could cost $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 on each side. I will tell you that I believe this statistic is from 2016. Average cost of a litigated divorce in California with children is about $25,000 per party, just a little bit south of $25,000. Now, again, that's about a 7-year-old statistic. So it has to be more than that now. And I know that we're in California, and so things are a little more expensive here, obviously. But still, even in a state that is not California, that's in one of the cheaper states to reside or whatever, you're easily probably looking at 15 on each side. And I don't know about you, but even if I've got 15 grand sitting in the bank, I could think of a lot more things I'd want to spend it on than attorney's fees. So one of the things you have to really look at from the beginning is how much is my war chest, is what I like to call it. And so you need to figure out overall, if push comes to shove, how will I keep going in this endeavor and how will I keep coming up with money to replenish my attorney fees if the worst case scenario happens? And when we're talking about that 20 to 25,000 or so, that's just the average cost. That doesn't even mean it's worst case scenario. Let's say that you end up with custody evaluators because there's some issue, like somebody's accusing somebody of drugs, alcohol, or something of that nature. Well, custody evaluator, guess what? $5,000 to $10,000 easily. Let's say that we have financial issues. Somebody owns a business. We're arguing about what the value of that business is or what kind of income it produces. Then you're looking at a financial expert to deal with that. Guess what? 5 to 10 grand easily. And you'll probably have opposing financial experts. So 5 to 10 grand on each side easily for that. So what happens in the beginning is we're just thinking about that initial $5,000 or so retainer, and we're not thinking about long-term what this could really cost. And then people get to the point where they're pulling from their 401k, they're borrowing from family, they're, pulling equity out of the house, or, they start trying to do all these different things to tap the resources. And honestly, if you'd known in the very beginning and said, okay, I'm capable of filing a petition myself, I'm capable of completing financial disclosures myself, but when I get down to negotiation and I really need that legal advice, or I go to trial and I really need an attorney to stand up and make arguments and do objections and all these different things, that's where I need to be leveraging my money. But again, what happens a lot of times is in the very first instance, emotions are high and we're fearful, we're scared, understandably. The problem with those emotions is the fear is the first thing that will lead you to make the wrong choice and cause you to screw it up. And so you really have to be aware of that and not have this reflexive action of, oh, I'm just going to run out and hire an attorney and file something and, get this whole process going. Because again, this is going to take longer than you think, and it's going to cost way more than you expect. So you really need to have a game plan in the very first instance of how you're going to handle this. And this is why I really think that the coaching services are so valuable, because it's not that we're trying to avoid an attorney. That's not the issue. I have lots and lots of clients that have attorneys. It's that one, we're trying to leverage our attorney and utilize more economical resources where we can to get our questions answered and to get guidance, so that we're spending the leverage piece on the attorney in the way that we need to, and so that we're planning long term with that war chest, worst case scenario of how much I'm going to need to spend and what I'm going to need to do if this all goes south. And guess what? If it doesn't go south and you don't need to spend that, perfect. But if you do, then you've got a plan in place for it. And, we always say you got to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I think a lot of people jump in out of fear. They go with their gut reaction, or they go with what some family member said or some friend said or that person's experience. And here's the thing. Do you want your life to look like this person's? Do you want to spend as much money as this person spent? Do you want your divorce to take as long as it did for whoever is giving you this advice? Because this eats up a lot of your energy, a lot of your time, a lot of your money. And so what's right for one person isn't necessarily right for another person, because our goals and our values are different. One person might feel like they got a good outcome in this if they won financially and didn't get as much time with their kids. Some people feel that way. Some people are like, it's quality, not quantity. If I got a little less time, but I'm secure financially and everything's cool on that end, then I feel like I won. Some people would say, I would trade every dime for that significant time with my kids. I don't care anything about the money. And so when we're taking advice from other people, we don't step back and say, are their values exactly like mine? Because even if it's your parent or your best friend or somebody close to you like that, your sibling, that doesn't mean that you always share the exact same values. And so you have to ask yourself, am I getting advice from somebody who, one, knows what they're talking about, knows what the court is going to look like, knows what the court's going to expect of me? Am I talking to someone who shares my values or is at least looking at it from the perspective of my values? And am I asking for advice from someone who is really has gotten the outcome that I would like to see in my life without it costing them a price that I'm not willing to pay? So it's not as simple as just relying on your friend or your parent or your sibling or whoever, because again, those values can be very divergent. So how do we keep from screwing it up in the first instance, right? I've told you that you cannot afford to screw it up. I've explained why. And so the question for me is always, okay, what do we do about it? The solutions are, number one, educate yourself. Please educate yourself on what this is going to look like, what the timelines take. Go in and watch your judge. If you have filed a case already, go in and watch the judge that you're in front of. That's a form of educating yourself. Go to the law library, look up things, learn. If you have more time than money to spend, then you have the time to go watch court, look up the law library information, check out appellate cases in your state, all those types of things. You have the time to do that. If you don't have that kind of time, then your education may come in the form of learning from someone, buying books, courses, getting coaching, those types of things, because those are the things that can compress time for you, right? A coach can come alongside you, pour that advice into you directly, pour that understanding and that education into you directly so that it compresses the timeline and you can learn it faster and easier without as much effort. So again, looking at our resources and saying, okay, I need to educate myself, but what's the most efficient way to do that given my personal circumstances? The next thing is support of other people. I've been preaching on this a lot lately. Again, because of my own situation with me losing Thomas a few months ago, I'm surrounded by family. I'm surrounded by a lot of really close friends and people that love me and Thomas. But guess what? A lot of them can't relate to this because they're not going through it, or they went through it, but it's been so long ago for them that it just doesn't have the level of freshness that it has for me. And they're not still in this state of trauma, thankfully, but it's hard to relate to what I'm going through. And so I've really had to seek out support from people that are in a similar time frame to me, that have lost somebody within the last, 6 years, within the last, few days to a couple of years. And so seeking out that support and things where people share the feelings of what you're going through now. And that's one of the reasons that I love group programs, because you have that benefit of not just the coach, but you also have the benefit of the other people. And I do have group programs for moms and dads. And the coaching will also save you in the long run. A lot of people at the very, very beginning of the process, they go, oh my goodness, well, I'm putting out for an attorney and now I'm going to put out for a coach too. And I'm going to spend even more money than I'm already spending. Here's the thing. That coach is going to allow you to leverage your attorney, because you're going to be able to ask that coach questions and get input and guidance on certain things that really you shouldn't be going to the attorney for. So many times attorneys are managing things that aren't legal aspects of the case, that are sort of like, okay, my ex is driving me crazy, or the children are complaining about this, or, she cut their hair, or they came back in dirty clothes, or all these little complaints that we hear on a day-to-day basis that aren't legal advice. But so many people spend tons of attorney fees trying to get input from their attorney on these types of issues. And frankly, your attorney doesn't want to deal with those issues. Your attorney's like, you know what? I'm here to practice law. I'm here to advise you legally. I'm here to push your case through the system from a legal perspective, but I'm not here to deal with all these little day-to-day issues that you're struggling with in your life. But the divorce or the custody issue permeates your entire life for you, right? Not just the court aspect of what's happening. So this is why that coach can help close the gap on the legal services, because you've got both sides covered. You've got the life side and the legal side. Now, I think it's critical that that coach understand the legal process and what it looks like so that they aren't working at cross purposes of what, your attorney is telling you to do. Obviously, a coach can't give you legal advice and isn't an attorney, but you definitely want to make sure that, they're not working at cross purposes and that they share similar philosophies. And by doing this and spending that little bit extra up front, I promised you it will save you at least threefold on what you're spending on your attorney. And it will keep your attorney's fees down because the attorney's fees will be spent at a slower pace because you have this other resource to go to. And then let's not forget that this other resource is meant to help educate you and help you understand so that you're conducting yourself well, so that when you do go into your attorney, you've got everything lined up nice and neat, and you're handing them everything that they need to actually accomplish getting a good outcome in your case. So those are my recommendations of how to keep from screwing this up, because you can't afford to do that. This is already a very stressful and a very expensive process, and you don't want to make it any worse than it has to be. So if you'd like to learn more about my personal coaching services, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. You can book a free strategy session using the link on that page. I'd love to chat with you and learn more about what your struggles are, see if there's a way that I can support you in this process. I'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your host, Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.